Welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. And we want to welcome back a very special guest. Today, we welcome back Michael Shermer. As we all know, he's a science writer, historian of science, founder of the Skeptics Society, and editor-in-chief of its magazine, Skeptic, which is largely devoted to investigating pseudoscientific and supernatural claims. He's the author of New York Times bestsellers, Why People Believe Weird Things and The Believing Brain, Why Darwin Matters, The Science of Good and Evil, The Moral Arc, and Giving the Devil His Due, Reflections of a Scientific Humanist. He's the host of the largely popular podcast, The Michael Shermer Show, and his newest book, coming out on October 25th, is called Conspiracy: Why the Rational Believe the Irrational. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks. Here it is. I should probably have it. I should probably have it up here somewhere. I don't even know how I would do that. But,
yeah. You could have it in the plant. Put it in the plant.
Yeah, that's right. In the plant. Yeah.
Oh, come on.
Here we go. How's that?
Actually, not bad.
You see? Not bad. Hey,
Sort of.
what started out as a joke.
Oh. There we go.
From a joke to an epic podcast moment.
That's right.
All right. So to begin, I'm going to actually read a passage from Michael from your book, and then we'll get it rolling. Okay. So Michael writes, quote unquote, "Have you ever wondered why we go to war? Or have you ever been, why we never seem to be able to get out of debt? Why is there poverty, division, and crime? What if I told you there was a reason for it all? What if I told you that that was done on purpose?" So this is a quote from QAnon. Then Michael writes, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I have wondered about such problems as war, poverty, divisiveness, and crime, as any thoughtful person might. There are entire fields composed of social scientists, historians, and policy analysts who study such problems and have constructed elaborate models with multi-factor analyses and regression equations to explain why so many of these causal vectors lead to armed conflict, crime and violence, poverty and debt, and political divisiveness. Each of these problems has sizable communities of experts conducting thousands of studies published in hundreds of scholarly journals and books to try to answer such important fundamental questions which are vital for functioning society to solve. But what if, as conspiracists often believe, these conditions and many more are the result of a single factor that can be rooted out by the right person?" So, I mean, obviously, when it comes to factor analysis and regression models, like, these are all really complicated things that the vast majority of people, probably myself included, won't ever really understand or be able to sort of wrap our minds around. So what is it that you think, this is now obviously going into your work, and what is it that you think kind of drives conspiratorial thinking, and why is it that for the most part, rather than, look at experts in different fields and try to sort of separate, let's say, different factors and try to figure out what's the sort of the quantifiable contribution of each, how come we kind of tend to look to one person or one entity or one institution or one organization to say that's the person, that's the culprit that did it?
Yeah. Well, the passage you read, in fact, I was just thinking about that recently because I just passed the 50th anniversary of when I started college in fall of 1972.
Wow.
Excuse me. And then so that got me going through some of my old notebooks. And then I found my notebooks from statistics and then regression analysis of variance. And I'm looking at these pages and pages of equations and thinking, who wrote all these things down? I don't even remember this, much less how to do it. Right. I mean, it's pretty complicated. If you have a kind of a rat's nest of interacting variables, how do you know which is the one that is making the difference and which is not making a difference? And it's really hard to tell. I was just thinking about this with a lecture on Monday with my students. I teach a critical thinking course called Skepticism 101. So we're talking about correlation and causation. And I just asked them, is it worth it being here in college? That is to say, is a college degree worth it? Well, there are people that study this, and it turns out you'll make about $1.5 million more over the course of your lifetime if you have a bachelor's degree versus not. And of course, there's other reasons to go to college than just to make money, but just that calculation alone. But how do you know it's the bachelor's degree that did it? How do you know that it's not you're smart and that's what got you into college, but it's the intelligence that it led you to earn more money? Or maybe it's your parents and your upbringing, and regardless of whether they sent you to college or not, they instilled in you a work ethic to make money or whatever. And healthier people make more money, and people in better neighborhoods make more money, and so on. So, it could be 3 or 4 or 6, half a dozen, could be a dozen different variables that go into the question of, about why you would make more money in the course of a lifetime. So that's an example where most of us have a hard time grasping that. including me, and I have training in it. And so it's just easier to think, well, you know what? It's really just this one thing. That's it. It's these, it's this cabal, it's this group, it's the Illuminati, it's, the alien lizard people that are running the world. I just had an economist on my show, Alan Blinder. He was vice president of the Federal Reserve Board. I mean, so he's one of these insider guys. Said, all right, just walk me through what's going on. Why do we have inflation? Why?
He's in the deep state.
Yeah, he's a deep stater. Yeah, exactly. I said, you're one of those guys that's behind closed doors pulling the threads, and none of us know what's going on, And but his answer was, well, it's complicated. Like, yeah, I know it's complicated, but come on. And so it's really easier in a way to think, it's this one thing here that is easily understandable versus nobody actually understands why the economy operates the way it does. I mean, economists have different theories, but they don't agree with each other. It's not like physics or something where you get mostly agreement on basic stuff. Not so with economics. So, and that's true with the political world, social world. So to the average person, just kind of looking around the landscape and thinking, why is all this happening? War and poverty and crime or whatever, and it's like, I don't know. And then you are floated some idea, they want to destroy America. Who's they? Oh, the libtards or the Democrats or, Bernie or Biden. And it's just easier to think it's just that, as opposed to nobody really understands, no one's can control, no one's running the show. That's actually kind of scarier. You mean it's just kind of random? Blah.
What is it in us that it sort of defaults to the negative when it comes to conspiracies? It's like nobody has a conspiracy of like, you ever heard of that term pronoia? Like it's as opposed to paranoia, you think that, the universe is conspiring to do something good for you.
Yeah, right.
Why aren't there any like good conspiracies? Why is it that we just are always so biased towards the negative?
Actually, there is one that would be The Secret, right? Which is that the universe wants you to have a Mercedes or a Tesla and it wants you to have a big house and so on. And all you have to do is ask the universe, right? Well, I've been asking the universe for all sorts of things and it doesn't give it to me. So maybe it's me, right? Yeah. So, so I argue in the book that it's an evolved propensity to look for negative things rather than positive things, because it's the negative things that can take you out of the gene pool. So we're more likely to focus on and remember, pay attention, things that are dangerous versus, small positive things that happen. Of course, we enjoy those, but, just think of like your Twitter feed or whatever your social media preferences is, and you get a bunch of likes, you post something, you like, yeah. Oh, what is this one negative? Who is this asshole? I'm going to, focus on this and I'm going to obsess about this one guy that didn't like what I said. That's pretty typical, right? I mean, so in behavioral economics, they say, the loss aversion, that losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good. To get somebody to make an investment, the payoff has to be about twice what it would be if you lost something and felt bad about that. And that's pretty normal. It's called negativity bias. And I have a long discussion of this in my chapter on constructive conspiracism. That is to say, enough conspiracy theories turn out to be real. That is, there are real conspiracies that it pays to err on the side of assuming more of them are true than probably are. And the driver behind that is this evolved cognition of negativity bias. We notice negative things more than positive things. And what's behind that is the really physics, the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Shit happens. Bad things happen all the time. There's 1,000 ways for things to go wrong in any given day versus only a couple of ways for things to go right. So, you better pay attention to those that could take you out of the gene pool. And those that weren't paying attention, they didn't leave offspring, right? So we're the descendants of those who make more type 1 errors, that is false positives, assume a pattern of threat is real when it's not, as opposed to missing it. The type 2 error, that is, you fail to recognize a real threat, and that can take you out of the gene pool. So anyway, it's an evolved cognition, I think, that applies to many things, but in terms of conspiracies, it applies in the sense that we're a social primate species. We evolved in these small bands and tribes of other primates. And it's true that there are coalitions of people that do things behind our backs that aren't always good, right? People gossip about other people, they plot in secret to do things. And so it kind of pays to be constructively paranoid a little bit. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. They might be. So, just in case, you should be cautious.
Right. And I love the conceptual model that you use. So it's essentially, for our listeners, it's two-tiered. On the one hand, you explain what are some of the psychological and social components of pretty much being the foundation of conspiratorial thinking, and then the heuristics or cognitive distortions that essentially sustain them and maintain them. So besides, obviously, now we talked about kind of the evolutionary aspect. So can you talk a little bit? I want to start with the foundation. So can we talk a little bit about the other two, and particularly proxy conspiracism? That's the one that really stood out to me, just because I can conceive of a world where you have a religious person and that person thinks of it as like evil versus good, God versus the devil. And then when you have something like a Facebook war, and then you have people saying, well, Hillary is the devil and Donald Trump is actually some sort of incarnation of Jesus, or Jesus is like follower, or whatever it is. Yeah. And then that kind of matches, right, what we're seeing in the world. And you're like, yes, this is what we've been waiting for. We've been waiting for this moment, Judgment Day or whatever it is. And here it is being played in front of us. So let's focus a little bit about proxy conspiracism. I think that one is the big one, especially like in the way it kind of applies to people.
Yeah. So this is the first leg of my three-legged stool theory of conspiracism. That is proxy conspiracism, tribal conspiracism, and the one I just mentioned, constructive conspiracism. So the proxy conspiracism, I thought of this while watching the insurrection on January 6th, and before that, the whole QAnon Pizzagate business, and the idea that the Democrats, particularly Hillary Clinton, is running a secret satanic pedophile cult out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. How could anybody that with two neurons or more, possibly believe this idiotic idea? I mean, it's just insane. It's crazy. It's dumber than the 9/11 truth theory. And yet, allegedly, purportedly, millions of people, mostly Republicans, do believe it. Or at least they say they believe it. But so here, what do you mean by believe? Do they really believe it? I mean, one guy did, Edgar Welch. He went there with his gun to break up the pedophile ring, which is what you would do if there really were a crime. You believe there really was a crime being committed, and the police weren't doing anything about it. And you'd go there, and it's like, I'm going to take the law into my own hands. People do this, and that guy did. But most people don't do that. So I don't think they really believe it specifically. I think it's more of a proxy belief. That is, it's a stand-in for something else. The kind of thing those Democrats would do. I don't know if Hillary's actually leading a pedophile ring out of a pizzeria, but it's the kind of thing those Democrats, those libtards, they would do something really bad like that. And she cheats and lies, and so it's more of a stand-in for some deeper proxy. Something else is going on there that you have to kind of drill down to get at. What is it that bothers people? In the case of conspiracism, it often revolves around power. Who has power, who doesn't. And most of us, back to the constructive conspiracism, are a little suspicious when there's not transparency of people that are behind closed doors doing things. And we don't know what they're doing. And they seem to have more power than I do. And that doesn't seem right. So there's something going on here. I don't know what it is. I'm very suspicious. And in reality, there's a good reason for that, because often people behind closed doors, without transparency, without checks and balances, this is why we have a regulatory state. This is why we have laws about insider trading, because without the laws, people will inside trade right and left, of course. Just like athletes they'll do what they can get away with, because that's the nature of the game, is to win. And so you need that. And so, of course, we're kind of suspicious of that sort of thing.
Yeah. And why I love that so much is because it's not the same thing, but it's very close to a cognitive behavioral model that like I would use as a therapist, because essentially we focus on core beliefs and then how information or incoming information is interpreted in the context of those core beliefs. So whether you have beliefs about yourself, beliefs about other people or another person specifically, groups, whatever, the world in general. So people find it kind of hard to think that, oh, it's the core beliefs that's affecting my interpretation of the data, where it's like for them, the way they look at the data, again, let's say if I'm religious and let's say I'm a Christian, television, I would look at the data and I would say, well, of course this is happening. Of course, we're expecting the devil to come, and we're expecting the devil sort of people to be Democrats in some way, because there's these hipsters or hippies or whatever, and they have these really weird beliefs and they're really sexually free, and then they want to get our children involved and yada, yada, right? And so it's so hard for people to see that it's actually your core belief that's helping you interpret the data, as opposed to the data being in some sense objective in the way that people want to think about it.
Yeah, there's even an example in the book, right? Essentially, if, for example, somebody says, oh, I don't like Obamacare, and then you might actually question them on it. What don't you like about it? What is Obamacare? And then, they just tend to fall apart. They can't even tell you what it is. It's just that my side, my tribe, or whatever it might be, just happens to think that way. So I'm going to fall in line and espouse that idea. It's
right. And now I love that, because now we're going into the biases, right? So now we're going into my side biases and others. All right. So Michael, now can we get into the actual, in terms of the framework? We started out at the foundation. Now let's get to the second tier. Now, how are the beliefs actually maintained?
Right. Well, so those are good examples, actually, because, excuse me, if you take something like climate change, anthropogenic global warming, that got bundled with the Democrats back with Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth. And so to conservatives, when they hear climate change or global warming, their brain autocorrects to socialism, communism, left-wing, destruction of American capitalism and free market enterprise. And it's like, wait a minute, we were just talking about CO2 gases and the melting of glaciers. How did you get into socialism and free market capitalism? What does that got to do with it? And the answer is nothing, except in their minds, they just take that kind of hypothetical journey down the path. Okay, if they do this, if this turns out to be true, then they're going to pass legislation, they're going to restrict business, and before you know it, we're Soviet Russia, whatever, excuse me. So or like, since you brought up Christianity, with creationists, say conservative Christians, if they hear Darwin or theory of evolution, again, their brain just autocorrects to, you mean atheism, immorality, relativism, anything goes, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. No, I don't like that at all. And it's like, wait a minute, we were just talking about biology and the explanation of the origin of species. How did you get into sex, drugs, and rock and roll? What does that got to do? Right. So to them, they just do this kind of counterfactual. Well, if everybody believes this, then the following things are going to happen, and before you know it, America goes to hell in a moral handbasket. And so to talk to somebody like that, you need to remove that off the table. You can keep your belief in Christianity, Jesus died for your sins, whatever, has nothing to do with evolution. You can accept evolution and keep your religion. Somebody like me, no, that doesn't work for me, but it can work for other people. And same thing with climate skeptics. No, you can still have free market capitalism and let people make a ton of money on green technology, right? So it's just kind of a way of a workaround that problem.
Right. Yeah. And I remember, so as I was reading the book, essentially, I mean, this is not something I'm necessarily proud of. I mean, people who listen to the show consistently already know this about me. So I was a longtime conspiracy theorist / libertarian, as most people on that side of the spectrum were. So for me, I think about, oh my God, like I think it was 10 plus years or something like that, I was really deeply into it.
I remember,
oh, yeah, wow. Man. Oh my God, man. It was so bad. I was listening to Alex Jones almost every day. I don't even know if you knew that about me. Yeah, I was listening to I was into all of that stuff. So David Icke, Alex Jones, there was another famous one. Oh my God. I used to listen to The Hour of the Time. Do you remember Bill Cooper? The Hour of the Time?
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, I remember he wrote Behold the Pale Horse.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
right.
I was actually into his stuff too, man. Yeah, so for like the longest time, I really loved these people. And I remember thinking like, there's just no possible way that this version of reality just can't be true. Again, first of all, it was all pretty logical, or at least seemingly so. At least it fit a really neat narrative.
Seemed rational.
Right. So it fit a really neat narrative. And I remember thinking like, as I went through the rabbit hole and started like learning about how they lie and they misuse data and obviously jump to conclusions. And then what's the other big one? They fill in the holes with not skepticism, but with what would you call it? With suppositions, right? We're pretty much like just hearsay or whatnot. And I remember thinking like, yo, there's no way that this world can't be true. But yeah, but it sounds so great, man. It's such a great narrative. And I remember it all started for me with Zeitgeist. That movie, I'm sure for anybody who's ever seen it, really blew me away. You remember that? So yeah, Bill Cooper and Zeitgeist. I
like that movie too.
Yeah, those are the two big things, right? And they're all bullshit, right? Come to find out, but not when you're watching them. They have this great way of of just like tailoring to your emotions, not only to your fears, but obviously kind of to your desires. It helps you explain why you aren't where you want to be in life. That's great. Where it says, well, if you're not one of the mega wealthy elite, there's no way for you to move up in the world. I remember actually being terrified of chemtrails, thinking, you know what? I might as well just give up on life. They're trailing us every single day. I'm going to have brain damage at some point anyway. What's the point of any of it? Yeah, that's how deeply into it I was. And so,
that's
Michael,
amazing.
do you find that it's like that for the people you encounter too?
Oh, yeah, right. There's a kind of certain internal logic to it. When you're in the bubble, they construct a worldview that makes sense. One thing follows from the other. If this is true and this is true, then that has to be true, and so on. That's like, well, that's what it was for me when I was a Christian. I went to Pepperdine University. I was Christian for about 7 years, born again evangelical Christian, and it made sense to me, the way everything was presented, and there wasn't a lot of skepticism. So when I went to a secular university for graduate school, it's not that nobody was religious. This is the late 70s. But it wasn't relevant. No one cared. No one talked about religion. Science and religion was not a thing. There was no war between science and religion. It just didn't matter. And there was no coherency to it. And I could see my way around it, like taking courses in comparative mythology. I went through my Joseph Campbell stage, and all that stuff, and the comparative world religions and anthropology of religion. And I was clear that, every one of them thinks they're the right one. Everyone lives in this kind of internally coherent worldview that makes sense until you step out of it. So one of the virtues of science and skepticism is that you have to step out of your bubble, because if you don't, somebody else will, and debunk your theory in print, right? That's kind of how it works. And so that's, and again, it's one test of conspiracy theories. Are they true or not? It's a signal detection problem. Some of them are true, some of them are not. How do you know? One way is to look for counterfactual evidence. What would refute your argument, whatever the conspiracy theory is? What evidence would go against it? It's easy to find evidence for it. We're all good at that. Confirmation bias, my side bias, and all that stuff. And but what would counter it? What would refute it? And most people have a hard time thinking of that. Like, I don't know, I've never thought about that. Or just simply, what would it take to change your mind? And that's a hard question for people to answer. And the reason appears to be that we don't naturally try to falsify our hypotheses about the world. We tend to just look for confirming evidence. It appears to be the natural way that we think. And you give subjects cognitive tasks to perform, problems to solve, and basically they look for ways to confirm what they think the answer is, not disconfirm it, right? So this is the problem with conspiracies. That they tend to be general enough. Conspiracy theories, they tend to be general enough and kind of loosely based on patterns that people think they see. It's easy to find evidence to fit it. Oh, the Jews are running the media, or 9/11 was an inside job because look what Bush did, or whatever it is. Obama is not born in the United States, and there's this weird anomaly here and this weird anomaly there. JFK, the QAnon, and so on. Like the QAnon drops, the Q drops, right? I mean, they're irrefutable. They're non-falsifiable. There's these kind of generic things. Oh, look, something big is going to happen in the next 6 months. Well, okay, no doubt, but what does that even mean, right? And that's the problem.
How do we talk to somebody, like let's say one of our friends or our family, or not even, or just a random person who's really bought into a conspiracy? How do we, I don't know, when somebody is so strongly identified with a position, right? Or let's say just that sunken cost bias, like they've invested way too much into that theory for them to be able to actually accept, counterfactual information. What's a way to sort of ease into that and maybe create some kind of rapport with that person in order so that they might not necessarily go to your side, just be more open?
Can I add on to that first?
Please.
So here I want to kind of give an example, right? So there was a conspiracy theorist from, I think it was 50s, 60s, 70s. I think he passed away probably the early 2000s. He was into like the Jewish banker conspiracy. His name was Eustace Mullins. He wrote a bunch of books. One of them was called The Curse of Canaan. So here's why I want to add this onto your question, right? So imagine this. So you have somebody like a Eustace Mullins follower. And by the way, this book is just so wild, the depth of it. And here's what I mean by that. So Eustace Mullins explained history, political, socioeconomical, geopolitical, military history in the context of literally the Bible. So what he does in this book is he traces everything. This is why it's called the Curse of Canaan. He traces everything back to this biblical story of Cain and Abel, and he says everybody are either descendants of Cain or or they're descendants of Abel. So what happens is, like, as the world kind of splits apart, right? He's like, you're one of these two folks, right? You're either sort of the good guys or you're the bad guys, and they could all be traced to that. And he goes into ancient Egyptian history, and he says essentially the Egyptian pharaohs were these descendants of Cain and these murderers who tried to enslave, like, the good Christians or whatever, even though there were no Christians back then, but like what would be the followers of Jesus at some point, right? I don't remember how he distinguished it. So essentially my point is, right, to add on to Alan's question, so how do you challenge somebody who essentially says, well, here's the thing, history is very deep, and these people have a way of explaining it in the narrative that actually fits everything. It fits all the problems that we've ever experienced, and it fits it in this narrative that even traces back to the Bible, right, to times that we can't even really imagine. How do you counter that?
Yeah, that's hard, because a theory that explains everything really explains nothing, because there's going to be anomalies and errors and whatever in there that just can't possibly be explained by a theory of everything. So, right, in zeitgeist is like that. Everything is connected. Everything that's ever happened. It's like, that's not possible. That's not how history works. Anyway, but I remember, since you were influenced by that, I remember watching that, going, God, this is just crazy. But there was enough things that kind of made sense. You're like, okay, maybe, like, if half of this is true, 10% of it's true, there's something going on here. Well, how about like 1% of it is true, right? And the rest is just bullshit. So, well, first of all, you can't tell somebody what I just said. You can't say what you believe is bullshit, right? Because then the wall goes up, cognitive dissonance kicks in, and they stop listening, and they go into fight mode. Like, well, how can this guy is trying to refute me, trying to defeat me, my ideas, so I have to put up my defensive walls. So instead, you do an end run around that. You just ask questions. Remember that show Columbo, where, the detective would always just keep asking. I have just one more question. Just one more question. And so, like, well, that's interesting. Where did you hear that, or where did you get that idea? Whose idea is that? And who is this person? What are their credentials? I mean, how would they know? And like, what they're saying, does it make sense for how we think the world works? And what's the evidence for that? Is it good evidence? Is it not so good evidence? Is it hearsay evidence? Would it fly in a court of law? If you were in a room where there was somebody like a defense attorney that was going to counter you with their evidence, would it stand up, and so on? So you just kind of ask questions like that, and you might throw in, I find that really interesting, or wow, I never really thought of it that way. Look at them in the eyes, nod like you're paying attention, because you should. I mean, if you're going to have a conversation with somebody, you should be respectful, leave emotions out of it. Don't equate them with Hitler and the Nazis, because, then it's over, right? The ad Hitlerum, right?
Yeah, right.
And, once you go to that path, the conversation's over. And, and then also try to steel man their argument rather than straw man it, right? You just say, let me see if I understand what you're saying. Are you saying you think the Bush administration either knew about 9/11 ahead of time and let it happen, or they were actually involved and they made it happen? Which of those do you believe? And then they'll tell you, and that's so interesting. If that were true, oh my gosh, that would be, that'd be earth shaking. But, how is it that, I don't know, how do you bring down a building with explosive devices, building like the World Trade Center? I mean, wasn't that attacked in the early 90s? And, it was like two of the most secure buildings in the world, with police and guards everywhere. I mean, how would you get in there to break through the drywalls to put the bombs on the structural beams to blow them up? How would that happen? And then you see what they say, right? You just ask questions like that. The buildings, if you watch the videos, it looks like the buildings fall. They begin their collapse right at the level where the planes hit at an angle. Yeah, that's it. That's interesting. How is it that the people that planted the explosive devices knew ahead of time which floors the planes were going to hit exactly at an angle? How is that possible? Explain this to me. I just don't get it. but asking in a kind of a, an inquisitive way, not like a threatening way. And then again, see if you can repeat whatever they say. Okay, let me get this straight. You think that Bush, one of the most incompetent presidents we've ever had, somehow managed to pull off this most complicated conspiracy ever, in the history of the country? I mean, how was that possible? And then just see what they say and just keep repeating it back.
Yeah. And that really reminds me of what happened with my college mentor, Dr. Tim Stroop, who taught at John Jay. That's actually exactly what he did to me. So I met him in my ethics and law class. And then, so he and I used to butt heads over about almost everything. So he was a liberal, I would say pretty progressive, if not socialist. And he and I used to butt heads on everything. And essentially he was like, look, man, he's like, I really think that you have a great capability of thinking. And there's something I see in you. Or he said something along these lines. He's like, there's something about you that makes me think it's worthy of having that you're worthy of having a dialogue with. And so, essentially I was like, oh, great. This is like my time to defeat this old guy. Like, who is he? And here I am. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna defeat this brilliant academic professor. And so what took years essentially entailed him sending me books, sending me articles, and he would actually take my ideas at least somewhat seriously. And he would say something to me along the lines of like, look, he's like, you can send me whatever you want to send me, and I promise I will, if I have the time, I will look into all of it. But he's like, you have to be willing to actually listen to my feedback. So he's like, if you want me to listen to it, I will listen to it, but please be open to what I have to say. I'm like, yeah, sure. What is he going to say? He's got nothing, right? Remember my conspiratorial mindset. I was like, you can't debunk any of this stuff. So as I'm sending him stuff little by little, he's giving me critical feedback. And then he's also telling me, he said, look, can I send you some other literature? So at the very least, how about this, right? He says, at the very least, you won't have a caricature of the other side and you'll at least know what it is you're attacking. And I'm like, oh, this is great. Yeah, perfect. I'm like, send me the literature. So he sends me one book after the other. He sent me a book called The Self-Made Myth. He sent me another book about, it's called American Amnesia, essentially how the system and how the kind of system in the country is not necessarily run by corporations per se, but essentially how there's kind of undue influence by corporations, and it's not really government that's the problem. And the idea is that government is, especially in terms of big government, small government would actually be the problem, because big government has made a lot of things happen, research development, in terms of health issues, whatnot, etc. And so as I'm reading these books, eventually I kind of come to him and I say, like, damn, man, I was like, I don't know how to say this, but you were like right a lot about a lot of this stuff. And he's like, right. And he's like, think about it. He's like, why would these people who are experts, why would they lie? What did they have to gain from it? He's like, what, money, power? He's like, a lot of these academics, they don't even make that much money. How are they in on this? He said, what do you think, like these people, these professors, he's like, how much money do you think I make? He's like, what peddling the sort of mainstream, bullshit view or whatever. He's like, what do you think I have to gain from it? And so as I'm reading the material more and more, I finally got the sense that this guy was trying to help me. So initially, as he started out as my adversary, and again, somebody who I really, there was no way for me to defeat him. I mean, his evidence was spot on. Mine was complete garbage. So there's just no way. So essentially the thinking became, okay, so here's this person who's in the sense trying to save me. So he sees something good in me. He sees that I have a lot of potential. And also he's not insulting me. He's not making me look foolish to other people. And he's trying to tell me that, like, look, man, what you're doing is harming yourself. You're really ruining your life with this stuff. And I'm just trying to show you how. At the very least, just look at the other side, right? He's like, at the very least, just see what other people have to offer and what other people have to say, which I never did as a conspiracy theorist. And by the way, I would say that is the major criticism of myself and other conspiracy theorists, is even though we say we're truthers or we're in search of the evidence or whatever, I never looked at the other side, ever. Or if I did, it was some bastardization. Yeah. It was some like caricature told by like some other conspiracy theorist who was like, oh, can you believe these nuts actually believe this? It's like, oh yeah, 9/11, right? Of course, what's it called? 16 hijackers or whatever it was. Of course. How the hell can they pull it off? And in my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's so stupid.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
I had an experience like that in college. When I started college, I was a born again evangelical, as I mentioned, and so part of being an evangelical is you're supposed to evangelize, right? You're supposed to tell other people about Jesus to save their soul. So I was doing that, and one of the best professors I had in my first 2 years of college, Richard Hardison, who was a longtime friend after that. He was pretty secular atheist and really wickedly smart. So I brought him material. Like, I just found my notes going through my archives recently. I gave him a copy of Hal Lindsey's Their Late Great Planet Earth. And me and my Christian friends, we used to go through that book, and then we'd read the newspaper like, oh my God, can you believe this? That, the Ayatollah Khomeini and Kissinger is, and the big bear, the Russians and the Israel, and it's all coming true just as it was predicted in the book of Daniel. Look, the eagle will face off with the bear in the Great Plains. It's like, oh, the eagle, that's got to be the United States, and the bear, that's got to be the Russians. It's all coming true. And anyway, so I gave him the copy of this book, and I said, this is it for sure. Like with you and your professor, he is gonna come around. This guy, he's smart, he'll see. And he sent me back like this 3-page, like 48 points of problems he found with the book. And I'm reading through this going, why didn't I see that? Oh my God, this is obviously a bunch of bullshit. I mean, it didn't happen quite that fast, but kind of sunk in my mind like, okay, there's something wrong with the way I'm thinking about these things, because I didn't see any of these points. Right. So it took a while to kind of come around to that. But yeah, I mean, that's all you could do. Really, you have to be non-confrontational, respectful, friendly. I'm just here. Think about this. Just give it some thought. I mean, we know from research, people rarely change their mind on the spot. Like, here's some counterfacts. Oh, I didn't realize that. In that case, I'm not a religious anymore. I'm changing parties. I'm going to be a Republican now from a Democrat, whatever. I mean, that almost never happens. Usually it's quietly behind the scenes later down the line. You never even know. The person just quits talking about it, or they change their mind and they don't tell anybody. And so that's all I think we can hope to do. Enough such that if somebody in the privacy of their lives says, okay, I think I'm not going to support QAnon, Trump, the rigged election, conspiracy theory, and all that stuff. I don't want to admit I was an idiot and wrong, except for the people that went to the Capitol on January 6th. They're in prison now saying, I really fucked up. But most people, I think, that believed it, at least they say they did, the election was stolen, and that was a good thing to go down there and do something about it. I think they're just quiet about it now. I think they're just quietly going about their business and not talking about it anymore. And I think that's, for the most part, the most we can hope for. And just try to plant that seed of doubt here. Just think about these few things right here, and then just think about it. That's probably all we can do.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, honestly, if you're truly interested in seeking the truth, right? I mean, wouldn't it interest you to know your own biases, that you may tend to go with groupthink and these sorts of things that we tend to do, that we identify with what we believe, right? I mean, I don't know. You would think somebody who's into conspiracies would be really into knowing what's the truest way to look at something, but it appears not. But one thing that's very interesting to me is that a lot of conspiracies are ridiculous, right? Like flat Earth and space is fake, whatever. Like, have you ever heard of that one? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. How about the birds? How about the birds are not real?
Yeah, the birds are.
That one I don't know about.
Oh well, this was just a hoax. That
I think
a guy was just having fun with this.
Go ahead. Okay.
Tell him about it.
No. I actually thought that when you said I don't know about it, I thought you actually thought the birds are robots.
No. That's funny. Yeah. No.
But the thing is, like, yeah, a lot of these are ridiculous, right? But there are actually some conspiracies that were proven, to be real, right? Like MK Ultra, Gulf of Tonkin. Correct me if I'm wrong. Project Mockingbird, I believe. Yeah. Perhaps. And I mean, what's interesting is that, I mean, the fact that there have been actual conspiracies, right? It does make one wonder, like, is there anything that maybe, is going around as a rumor, as a conspiracy now that, has enough dissent sewed into it that might actually be something that's real that we just don't know is real right now? I understand that's very vague and general, and this is probably a trap that I might be.
Yeah, you're essentially asking, like, how do we know that any of the conspiracy theories that are proliferated today, how do we know that they're not real? How do we not know 20 years from now we're gonna be like, how do we fall for that?
Yeah, essentially, yes. Not quite, but yeah, essentially that question. Yeah.
Well, so there's another avenue into talking to your conspiracy theory friend without offending them, is to acknowledge right up front there are conspiracy theories that turn out to be true, a lot of them. And you can just rattle off a few, like you just mentioned, MK Ultra. You know, the CIA was dosing U.S. citizens protected by the Constitution without their knowledge or consent with LSD and other mind-altering drugs as part of the Cold War. Kind of like there was a missile gap with the Russians. Well, there was a mind control gap. Excuse me. And we have to close that gap and have our own experiments. And I mean, it's much more extensive than that. You know, the whole Project Paperclip, in which we were absconding with Nazi scientists before the Russians absconded with their Nazi scientists, and it was kind of an arms race. This is how we ended up with Wernher von Braun, the most famous of the Paperclip scientists. It was about 600 total, but he was the most famous one that ended up, kind of orchestrating the whole Apollo mission to the moon. That was Wernher von Braun, which, he cut his teeth on rockets with the V2 Vengeance rockets that he launched against England from this base called Peenemünde that was basically run by a slave labor camp of Jews, tens of thousands of who died. So, we have this bizarre situation in the late 40s, early 50s of the United States and the other allies putting on trial for war crimes people that did the same kind of things, these Operation Paperclip scientists that we brought to America, gave them jobs, put them up in nice homes, and they lived out their lives and as free American citizens. And here what they did was not so different from what the people we executed after the Nuremberg trials, and then there the doctor trials, and there were a few others. And it's like, wait, we did this? Yeah, we did. I mean, a lot of this was it just came to light in the last decade, maybe 20 years or so. And CIA involved in assassination plots against foreign leaders, like Castro, most famously, but not just Castro. We were involved in the assassination of quite a few South American dictators in the kind of belief that a fascist dictator is probably better than a communist dictator in terms of their support of American industrial interests in their country. They're less likely to nationalize the company if we put money into it. And so we'll prop up this guy rather than the other guy. I mean, this is how Saddam Hussein became our enemy. Then before that, he was our friend, and we gave him money and weapons and whatnot. It was just insane. And the stuff from WikiLeaks and Ed Snowden, all the way up to this century, our own government spying on our citizens, not just metadata, right? They're actually, monitoring email and phone calls and that of foreign leaders like Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany. What? We were doing this? During President Transparency, Obama's administration. So, I could go on and on like I do in the book. The point is that, once you acknowledge that to a conspiracy theorist, they go, okay, yeah, that's right. This guy, he recognizes the problem that I see. Then you can pull back and go, okay, but not all conspiracy theories are true. Some of them are not true. And then the question is, back to my signal detection problem, which ones are real? Which signals that you're detecting are signs of a real conspiracy that happened or is happening or not. It's a false alarm. And there is no answer. It's just, it depends on the particular claim. Right. JFK, I have a whole chapter, JFK blown away. I think he was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone. Full stop. And I think I built a pretty solid case for that. But that's not to say it doesn't happen. I just rattled off a bunch of CIA assassinations. I mentioned those. And of course, Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy. And, the government figured out who did it pretty quickly and put him on trial, executed him, and so on. So it does happen. Some non-trivial percentage of world leaders, Western European monarchs and other kings and whatnot were assassinated over the course of like 500 years. Somebody did a count on this that I cite in the book, that it was something like 30% of all monarchs were assassinated. I mean, they lost power in a coup, right? So it's not completely crazy to think, this is a coup or this is an assassination attempt or there's some plot, there's some cabal behind overturning, our country. This does happen. It has happened a lot in history. Right. So, that's why I also devote a chapter to conspiracy detection. How do you know? What are the signs that it might be real or that it's probably not real? things like how many people would have to be involved. The more people that have to be involved, the less likely the theory is to be true, simply because people are incompetent. They chicken out. They can't keep their mouth shut. Like just think about 9/11 inside job, right? How many people would it take to bring down the World Trade Center buildings with explosive devices? Well, you can talk to people that do this for a living, demolition experts. There's companies that do this. And, they have dozens, hundreds of people working there for weeks, preparing a building to demolish it. This is something they do all the time. And how would they get into those buildings, the World Trade Center buildings, to do all this? And are you telling me not one of these, let's just say a couple hundred people that worked on this project, not one wants to go on 60 Minutes and go, oh boy, have I got a story for you, or write a best-selling book? I was there, I was on the ground floor, and or I know somebody, my spouse, this guy I was married to, he was involved, he told me all about it, I got the receipts, I got the pictures. This is what people do. and not one has come forward about 9/11 as an inside job, not one. So that tells us, okay, it's probably not true. Or how many elements have to come together at just the right time and right place. Because the way most conspiracy work is very haphazard, very much subject to chance and contingency. Accidents happen, things don't work out just right. I told you to be there at 6:37 and you were late by 5 minutes, and that threw off what I was going to do, and then this guy was going to do, and the whole thing unravels because it didn't come together quite right. And again, just turn to Watergate, which was a conspiracy. But here, kind of a conspiracy of dunces. Here you have these G-men, these FBI guys like G. Gordon Liddy, and they couldn't even break into a hotel room without getting caught. I mean, come on. They have the resources of the most powerful, person on the planet, Nixon, and whatever, he provided money and whatever, was needed, and they still screwed it up, right? That's how it usually goes. So the more of that's in the conspiracy theory, the less likely it is to be true. And again, small scale stuff is pretty normal. I think this corporation is conspiring to cheat the regulatory state to gain an unfair profit over other companies in the industry. Yeah, no shit. That happens all the time, right? They get busted for it, like Volkswagen is the example I use. For years and years, they cheated the emission standards by modifying their catalytic converters or whatever they did. And this came to light, right? But that is not surprising, right? This is how the world works. We know this happens. This guy was caught for insider trading. Oh, that's a shocker. Right? That's a real conspiracy, right? Just a couple people involved. You don't have to have that many people in the know. You can pull it off. By contrast, it's harder to pull off a giant conspiracy. World domination. We're going to take over the world. We're going to run the economy. Nobody knows how to run an economy. Not even economists who do this for a living know how to do it. And so, what are the chances that 12 guys in London, the Illuminati, they're pulling the strings, the cigarette smoking man on X-Files? Come on, that's just not how the world works.
Yeah, I love your application of Bayesian reasoning. So essentially in the book, you say we have to think about essentially these priors and what is it that we know about conspiracies, like what type of conspiracy theories in this particular case would be true. Large scale ones, we've never found one, or at least, let's say mega large scale ones, we've never found one. So for the most part, yeah, there's a plot of maybe a couple of, even a dozen, maybe a couple of people trying to conspire against someone. So I think what you're essentially saying is that based on our prior knowledge, if we're looking at incoming evidence, we could discount some of them off, like, kind of, I guess, out of hand, and say something along the lines of, okay, this is probably not worth our attention. Time is limited, so this is not worth our attention. This sounds like it's absurd. But then when we're talking about a more minor scale conspiracy, like let's say even several people trying to assassinate a political figure, okay, we should probably look into this because this sounds like something it can happen. Is it related to the CIA, the FBI, the KGB, Mossad, on and on it goes? Probably not, just because we've never seen anything like that in the history. And then of course the conspiracy theorists would say, whoa, nothing that we know about. But then now obviously the burden of proof goes on you, because I don't have the time to explore all of that. So I love that. I love the way that you conceptualize essentially what we should and shouldn't give attention to in this very sort of middle of the line way, where we're not saying that we're discounting everything, but we're also not saying that we're considering. It's like a famous quote, don't keep your brain so open that don't keep your mind so open that your brain falls out. So essentially right. We're saying we'll consider some things, and yes, we'll meet you halfway, because there's some just truths or some truth to what you're saying, but we're not going to accept everything. We're not even going to take seriously precisely everything that you're saying. And then so to kind of piggyback off of even what I'm saying now, I love your idea with going back to the George Bush example, where essentially if you have these three options, on the one hand, he's either doing it on purpose, kind of, let's say on the other hand, it's, oh, he let it happen. I love that there's this third option that says, well, he's just an opportunist. So if we're thinking about, I don't know if you would call this a conspiracy theory per se, it's like he's waiting around waiting for it to happen, but there's some truth to that. Like, yes, was George Bush waiting for that kind of opportunity to invade Iraq? Yeah. And I mean, we knew that Saddam Hussein tried to murder his father, so we were all kind of waiting for that. So in some sense, yes, there's this third option that I really love that essentially tells conspiracy theorists like, hey, it's not that everything that you're saying is stupid, but you have to consider the fact that these extreme examples are very unlikely to be true, even though there's a kernel of truth sprinkled in there.
Yeah, I call that cow hop, capitalized on what happened on purpose, as a play on the, let it happen on purpose, lie hop, and made it happen on purpose, my hop, for the two 9/11 ones. By the way, Roosevelt, after Pearl Harbor, was accused of that. He must have known. What about these memos that he got? And it seemed like it was obvious the Japanese were going to attack Hawaii, and they didn't do anything about it, so therefore they let it happen on purpose or made it happen on purpose. No, I mean, Roosevelt was looking for an excuse to get into the war to support the British, who were desperate for our help. And, because of treaties and laws and things like this, there's only so much he could do. The Lend-Lease program, give them 50 destroyers, do this, do that, kind of like what we're doing with Ukraine now. We can't send troops in there, but we can give money, we can do this, we can do that, based on treaties and laws and whatnot. But of course, if we had the opportunity to really get in there and defend Ukraine, we would. And so you're kind of waiting for that moment to capitalize. So yeah, George Bush, obviously, in hindsight, he wanted to finish what his father didn't finish in Iraq. And so he did. I mean, it never made sense to invade Iraq. And, he admitted later it was a big mistake, the so-called evidence of weapons of mass destruction, the yellow cake and all that stuff. And, Colin Powell was sent into the UN to make the case, probably the most embarrassing thing he's ever done in his career. And I suspect he knew it was a bunch of bullshit. But it's a team sport, right? Well, the boss says I got to go in there and do it. And I'm a good team player, so I'll do it, right? That's my guess, and since he died last year, he had that kind of stain on his reputation. That it's just unfortunate that's the way it goes. But yeah, so politicians capitalize on what happened on purpose. They do that all the time. And but because so much is random about particularly wars and international relationships, that much of what happens is just totally random, and therefore you wait for that moment and then you jump on it. Is that a conspiracy? Well, maybe, although in the modern era, you have to get permission, right? You got to get the votes. So, Bush had his coalition of the willing, which was like 6 other tiny nations we barely even ever heard of, that were behind it, except for England. And, so, or you got to get a UN resolution, get a vote. In the case of Putin, last week, we're going to have a referendum in the Donbass region of Ukraine. Why does he even bother with that? Everybody knows it's bullshit. Well, because today you can't just come in and go, I came, I saw, I conquered, end of story. This is how it works, right? Ever since the Second World War in particular, you have to have reasons for it, right? It's like, I came, I saw, and I was just standing there minding my own business, and he attacked me, so I had to invade, right? So it's kind of a pretense to war. So much of what we think of as conspiracy, about these conspiracy theories, about these real conspiracies, they're more like along the lines of what I just said. It's sort of how international relations go these days. It's a kind of conspiracy, a little bit different than what we usually read about conspiracy theories involving politics.
Yeah. And I love that when you talk about war, you essentially say, look, well, let me actually go back. So the conspiracy theory is that there's the like notorious or nefarious bankers, and they're essentially trying to sort of drive up war. So they want war. They want us all to kill each other. They want depopulation, etc. So essentially in your book, you say that, no, actually, if you think about the way wars have been working, we've been kind of decreasing wars, right? So there are these other avenues to resolving conflicts, like economic sanctions. So can you talk a little bit about those, essentially how wars have actually, in some sense, have been in the scale of them? Have they been kind of going down as opposed to going up? And if let's say that, and if the conspiracy theory of well, they're just trying to depopulate us is true, you would actually see the alternative trend. You would see World War 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The counterfactual. If this was true, what else would have to be true? Well, the following thing should happen, and they didn't. So your theory is probably not true. Yeah, that's one way to think about it. Well, I have that section in there because I talked about World War I, which was launched by a conspiracy to assassinate Franz Ferdinand and, to kind of free Serbia from the pending control by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, of which Franz Ferdinand was about to come into power when his father was going to die. He's very old. So, there was a plot to assassinate him by these Serbian nationalists. The Black Hand, the group was called. But this is kind of typically how it goes, right? There was like 7 of them, and somebody didn't show up to pick up his weapon at the appointed place, and somebody else forgot the password, and somebody went to the wrong spot where he was supposed to stand, and somebody else's hand grenade didn't go off when he was supposed to throw it, and somebody's gun jammed. I mean, that's typical of how it goes. And Franz Ferdinand is driving along in the motorcade there, and they threw the hand grenade, and this one did go off, but it bounced off the back trunk of his car and rolled under the car behind him before it went off, and so his comrades were hurt. And so he dashes off to give his speech, and then he's upset about this being treated this way. And then they decide, well, let's go to the hospital to see how our comrades are doing, and they take the parade route back, and then made a wrong turn. The driver makes a wrong turn. These were old cars. It was 1914. This particular car he had didn't have a reverse. So the driver's like, oops. So he kind of puts it in neutral and backs down this wrong turn. And he just happens to be at the corner where one of the guys, this Gabriel Princip, was standing there. Yeah, and he's just like, oh my God, there he is. Bam! Shot him dead. Completely unplanned, totally random accident. Just just total contingency there that never was supposed to work out that way. And that led to Austro-Hungary having to respond with their troops against Serbia, and then that led the Russians to have to back and militarize, and then the Germans had to militarize, and the French had to militarize, and the British had to militarize, by which I mean call up the troops and get it ready and for invasion and war and so on. And before you know it, the guns of August, and we're off and running. And and 4 years later, 8.5 million people are dead. That's kind of typically how it goes, right? So. But I got off on a sidetrack there because you asked me.
War. Yeah, that's okay. This is the kind of the prelude to it. Yeah.
Right. So to prevent that from happening again, there was this kind of push toward outlawing war, right, and making it illegal unless there's really good reasons, like that again that this was our territory and they came in and took it, and therefore we're going to invade them to get our land back, something like that. Defensive, kind of a defensive war is acceptable, but. So that's what led to all these responses. Okay, so when somebody does violate one of these rules about war, what do we do? Well, to prevent World War I from happening again, let's have economic sanctions. That is, the kind of outlawry of war. It's illegal. So, but we don't want to respond to something they did with sending our troops in. So let's just not trade with them anymore. We'll just take them out of the community of nations, the family of nations, and we won't play with them anymore. So we're still doing this. We're doing just today. What is this? October 5th. Biden ramped up some more economic sanctions against Russia because of the referendums he heard. And North Korea, launched that rocket that went over Japan yesterday. We're wrapping up more economic sanctions. They don't always work, but they work enough to kind of keep people in check from escalating things too much, because we have such a complex international network of trade that if you're truly isolated, it's going to be difficult to maintain any kind of quality of life for your citizens. So, it's hard to do that, but it's better than going to war. Anyway, that's kind of how I ended up talking about that.
Right. I love it. So it's like we want less war rather than more.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what Putin's going to do if he uses tactical nukes. How do we respond to that? I'm hoping he won't, but you never know. He's pretty unpredictable. And do we respond with tactical nukes? We won't go over that. We won't top it, but maybe we'll try to match it. And we've already done the draw the line in the sand and scold him for being a naughty boy for, for the like Crimea, in what was that 2014, and Obama said, that was really, really, really bad. We are really, really mad at you, and don't do that again. Right. So he waited until this year to do something more. I don't know. This is kind of out of my league of what's the right thing to do. I don't know. But sending troops in and, more American soldiers dying is probably not the solution at this point. We just finished 2 wars, 20 years of armed conflict. It's just obviously that it's not a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I hope not. It doesn't go to that. Hopefully there won't be a use of tactical nukes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Alan has family in the Ukraine now. So
you do.
Yeah. My brother, who I grew up with here in New York, he actually lives there, and why does he live there? Yeah, I know.
By the way, so to his credit, he actually, Ukrainian refugees lived with him for months here.
Wow.
Yeah, he took them in. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I didn't think to mention that, but I'm just kidding. No, thank you for.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing. You're a mensch. I said this before. It's really wild. Yeah, for no cost. Like, they just lived with them.
Yeah.
So what is he? He's back there now?
Yeah, he's there now. Yeah, he was here most of his life. Just decided to move there. Essentially, we have family over there. Family of my father and stepmother, and he got used to living there. Started to like it there more. Living like close to that Odessa, Ukraine sort of region. It kind of is in a village though, so he's not exactly in. He's like in the western part of Ukraine, so he hasn't seen like things happening around him. But I do have family in Odessa who've had like rockets like land not too far from where they live, and yeah, so I don't know, knock on wood, hopefully no tactical nukes. If it gets to that, then whoa. But I guess it's because I have a personal stake in it. So.
In this category of even the experts not really understanding why things are happening, how come no one saw that the Russians would not just easily walk over Ukraine and in 3 weeks they'd be running the country? That didn't happen, and everybody acts like it's a complete surprise that Ukraine has been able to do what it's done. Why is that? Why did we not know this?
Yeah, originally, I mean, if you asked me too, I would think, hey, Russia's like a superpower, right? I mean, Of course, the assumption is they're gonna take over Ukraine in no time, and Ukraine's just been mounting this incredible defense. They had a draft over there, right? Anyone between 18 and 60, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and then just mobilized people. Apparently, the morale just shot up. They had like, I remember in the beginning, they're like, "Oh yeah, we have the Klitschko brothers here."
That's right.
And the boxes and the world is standing with Ukraine, and all of a sudden, people are like getting behind Zelensky too, and there's this like huge amount of respect that just went up for him. And I don't know, I'd hate to just chalk it up to morale. I know it's way more complicated than that, like incredibly way more complicated than that. But it's great to see how they're managing, and how Russia's been defeated in like Liman recently, and I mean, we'll see. I mean, a lot of the news over there in Ukraine, they think that, it's maybe within a month's time, maybe less, the war will be over. But that's just, you never know, right? I mean,
yeah, of course, they were saying that back in February, March.
That's right.
Here we are, October. Although I could see Putin saying, you know what, I got what I wanted. Although now it looks like he's being pushed out of the Donbass region. But I thought he might just pull out and go, this is all we ever wanted in the first place. These are our people. So I'm taking our troops back home and declaring victory. We won. And then the rest of the world going, oh, whew, okay.
Yeah. So, and as we start wrapping up, the last thing I want to really focus on is, so I'm a huge Tupac fan. We've had one of the outlaws on, Napoleon, who's one of the group mates of Tupac's. So I love the part that you had on celebrities. And essentially this was, by the way, as my conspiratorial mindset was, this was something that fascinated me for years, because the Tupac's assassination, murder, whatever you want to call it, it's had so many freaking theories about it. So we've had like just books, movies. It's pretty much almost as big as JFK, if not as big, the Tupac and Biggie murders. So, you know, when you actually talk to some of the outlaws, these Tupac's group mates, they would tell you, they're like, it's actually open and shut. Everybody actually has always known who's killed Tupac, and it's actually the official story. And there's a person who came out and he said, oh, I was the one who like orchestrated the, it wasn't really a hit. It was whatever, long story short, he got into a fight with somebody in Vegas. Then the guy was a gang member. The gang member went to one of his set leaders. The set leader's like, oh, you have to kill him now. And the gang member's like, okay. And that's it. That's the official story. And that's what it's always been. The guys come out and he said, yeah, because I have immunity, I'm actually going to tell you that it was me. I was the one who orchestrated it. He told the entire story. So
why does he have immunity?
Oh, so he was, oh man, so I don't want to butcher this. So for my vague memory of it, so he was the informant on some other major case, and they essentially told him that if he would, if he would inform on this case, that he could, that we would not try you for the Tupac case. And he said, okay, cool. And then so, but there's some from my, oh man, I wish I knew more about this right now because I forgot. But there's still, so it's a little bit vague. So there's some speculation that he might still be tried for it, but so far there hasn't been anything. And he revealed this in about 2016 or 2017. So nothing's happened to him since. And by the way, he's near death. He has like late stage cancer at this point. So essentially everybody kind of knows who killed Tupac and everybody knows why. But the thing is, the story is horrible because what it is that he gets into a fight with somebody in Vegas over nothing, completely random, has nothing to do with him because he was sticking up for his buddy. The guy gets embarrassed and obviously it's on camera. His friends were there. He's humiliated. He goes back to his boss and the boss is like, oh, you're going to let him do that to you in front of everybody? And the guy's like, all right, okay, I'm gonna kill him, right? This like pretty much nobody, this absolute nobody killed the great Tupac. And so for all of us, we were just like, no, there's no way, there's no possible way that this absolute nobody could have killed one of the greatest human beings, you know, in some way who's ever lived, you know, amongst the Marilyn Monroes and the John F. Kennedys of the world. Yeah, so let's talk about that. So why is it so hard for me, especially at this point, right? Why was it so hard for us to accept that somebody like a Tupac could just be murdered by, you know, again, on something seemingly so random?
Well, there is a mismatch, a cause and effect mismatch. You know, we want the size of the cause of the death of the person to match the size of the person. Right. So, you know, JFK, leader of the free world, most powerful person in the world, was killed by who? Lee Harvey Oswald. He was just this, you know, fucking loser, just a nobody. And, you know, cause of death of Princess Di, you know, drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. That, you know, tens of thousands of people die of that every year in America. But princesses are not supposed to die like that, right? So you add elements, you know, with Kennedy, it wasn't just Lee Harvey Oswald. Maybe he was a patsy, maybe he was involved, maybe he wasn't, but it has to be other people to match the size of Kennedy. Right. So the FBI and the CIA and the KGB and the Cubans and the Russians and the mafia and, you know, whoever else, you know, and you just add it all up. And it's now that seems like a more cognitive balance for that. Same thing with Princess Di, you know, it was the MI6 or it was the royal family or whoever was involved in it. And so and I think there's something also of kind of the belief in a resurrection mythology. I've been kind of exploring this a little bit, like they're not really dead.
Yes.
Right? They're somewhere else, you know, because there was a study I cite in the book called Dead and Alive. And, you know, people that tick the box for the belief that Princess Diana was murdered are also more likely to tick the box for the theory that she faked her death and she's still alive somewhere. Her and whoever, you know, or her and Elvis or whoever, you know, still living in South America with Hitler and whoever else, or, you know, big people, you know, maybe they just don't die at all. You know, there's kind of a resurrection, you know, like a Jesus story, you know, yes, he died, but he was brought back. You know, there's something like they're still alive somewhere. You know, also the, you know, difficulty of accepting the death of people we know. You know, people are always shocked in a state of denial for a while. And celebrities or famous people feel like somebody we know. I mean, they're almost like faux family. Like, oh my God, you know, Kobe died. Oh my God, this was, you know, a massive story for days. And it's like, well, how many of us knew Kobe? You know, nobody, right? A handful of people watching. But it seems like we knew him, and you can apply that to anybody. And there's still Marilyn theories, conspiracy theories about Marilyn and Elvis. You know, there's this new film biopic about him and his complicated relationship with his manager and all that. You know, there's conspiracy theories about all that. he's murdered or he's faked his death. Same thing with Marilyn's a new documentary series on Netflix about Marilyn. I think it's Netflix, where there's some evidence that there was some foul play, or that people knew she was dead, or let it happen on purpose, or made it happen on purpose. It's one of those things, and so on. But people that take a lot of medication and drugs, they're upping the odds of dying accidentally. So it's much, Bayesian reasoning, much more likely that she died from what we think she died of, just drug overdose, just mix the wrong drugs. This happens all the time. And just, but again, princesses, famous people, powerful people, they're not supposed to die that way. So I didn't know that much about the Tupac conspiracy theories. I remember hearing about it when it first came out, but I didn't really look much into it. It's interesting that it was just that what you said it was. That's the kind of a Lee Harvey Oswald, just some nut, just because that's kind of a police blotter type homicide. We know most homicides are more moralistic in nature. They're not instrumental. I killed him because I wanted his Rolex or his BMW. It's more like he scratched my car, or he slept with my girlfriend, or he embarrassed me in front of my friends, so I had to do it. Right. And, Roy Baumeister has this great book called Evil, where he interviewed serial killers, and to a man, and they're all men, they all said, well, the person deserved it. I mean, he had it coming. I just did what was the right thing to do, whatever it was. And they're always stupid reasons, like the example you gave, well, he insulted me, or I was embarrassed in front of my friends. It's on tape. You're not going to let that stand there. No, I'm not. Right. And that is kind of typical, but you don't want someone like Tupac to be part of that. But in fact, from a Bayesian reasoning, that's far more likely than that there was some deep plot.
Right. And then what's so interesting about that is in the gang community at the time, they were kind of like trophy hunters. Were killing somebody like Tupac was a badge of honor. So for so the guy's name was Orlando Anderson. So for somebody like him, who's essentially just the guy in the community, for him to have done something like that and then to go back to his neighborhood, he was the king. And by the way, Michael, if you had to guess, what do you think the most popular documentary on Tupac is called?
Oh, I don't know.
Tupac Resurrection.
No way.
Yes,
really?
yes. Yeah, it was an MTV Films movie in 2002. Yeah. Yep. And the reason why it was called that is essentially because he narrates the entire documentary, like they piece together interviews and clips or whatnot. Wow. But yeah, that was the main theory for a long time, that there was going to be 7 years between his passing and between the time where he's resurrected and he comes back from wherever he fled to. Yeah. Or fled to.
Oh my God, that's great. I wish I had that in my book. That's a great story. That fits perfectly with the themes. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. Right.
Yeah. And resurrection, it seems like for a lot of these people is a big thing, because I think for celebrities, a lot of us want to believe that this is just it's not just my hypothesis, but I'm assuming this is the underlying idea. We want to believe that these people we love so much, who are in some sense greater than us, if they can survive, the sort of mundane, then maybe somehow we'd be able to too.
Yeah. Yeah. That might tap into deeper beliefs about the afterlife. And, people don't really die. I'm not going to really die, am I? I mean, I can't imagine not existing, because by definition, to imagine not existing, you have to be conscious and sentient to imagine anything, right? So you literally cannot picture yourself dead, because to picture yourself, you're alive, right? So I think that my previous book, Heavens on Earth, I talked about that. Just really, it's not possible to imagine there just being nothing, which is really what it was. I mean, what it would be is like, where were you before you were born? I didn't exist. There was no existence of me. Right. And that's what it'll be like when you're dead. You just stop existing. But that just seems like, what? Wait, I can't picture that. Yeah, I know. That's the problem. Like, imagine nothing. There's no universe, no space or time, no matter, no concepts, no logic, no platonic ideals, no God. No space or time, because there is no space or time. And at some point you just go, I don't even know what this means. I mean, we're just using words. I mean, it's impossible to imagine there being absolutely nothing. And anyway, so I think it's the same problem there.
Right. And it's also impossible, I think, to imagine that our Christ-like mortals on earth, that they can ever pass, because if they pass, again, what does that say about us?
Yeah.
All right. So Alan, before we wrap up, final questions for Michael?
Yes. So if we wanted to follow your work, and of course buy the book, where can we do that?
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. Of course, Amazon's always a reliable place. You go to a local bookstore, the book should be in all bookstores everywhere. If people are still going to bookstores, I hope so. I like bookstores. But Amazon, of course, you can go to skeptic.com for the magazine. Here's our latest issue on abortion matters. We did a redesign of the magazine. You can find that there. And my book will be on sale there at skeptic.com after October 25th. And or michaelshermer.com too.
I love it. All right. Awesome. So, Michael, 2 things before we wrap up. First of all, I love your podcast, as you obviously know, but I wanted to say it on air. And then also, your book is one of my favorite books of 2022.
Oh, wow. Wow. Gosh. Wow. Okay. Here it is October. So that's quite
I know. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
I wish the me of 10 years ago could have read it. All right, funny. Michael. Okay. Michael, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Have a good night. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye, guys.
All right. First of all, that was awesome. And everyone, if you want to follow us, you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. We're on Twitter as Seize_podcast. Like, subscribe, hit the bell on YouTube. And thanks again so much for watching. That was a blast.
Yeah.
See you next time.